Ricard, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So this is actually the third annual report we do in this region, starting off in 2019. As Carsten said, we were inspired by the Global Impact Investing Network, the GIN, that have done this now for 11 years, and at that point for 8 years. But we also wanted to look into early stage because there's been a lot of reporting on more institutional money throughout the world in sustainability and so on. So we said that let's tap into that after understanding impact starters for a few years. So this is the third report we do here. And as introduced here, there are several attendances for this year. We can see that there's more actually venture funds being part of our survey, which means that I think it's not only on accelerators and business angels' interest to look into this, but also venture funds in general like to join on this. And as you can see here on the third one, that almost all have an objective to invest for impact instead of maximize their financial return. So we looked into through different areas within this report, and also have a lot of articles. It's downloadable from now on. One area that we can see that actually more institutional investors actually say, like SEB in Sweden, who have invested money into VC funds, that to just go ahead investing as usual is actually a risk for the future. So you have to place your money into those funds. So the allocation we can see from investors is that most of investors actually use the private equity or direct investment space. We can see that most of them have actually almost all of their investments into impact. And still, technology is a huge driver for what they invest in. If you look a little bit on, you could say, the causes, or why do they actually do this, that there are still very much focus how you could say traditionally in venture investors think and work. So it's very much about the team. It's very much about scaling opportunities. It's about how do I understand this market, and also if it generates good opportunities for returns. There is still, I think, maybe too less focus on things like, is this problem actually solvable? Or is there scientific data or studies enough to underpin that solution? And are there externalities out of those solutions? Those are areas where investors don't look that much still. Then also in this report we try to look very much more onto methodologies and methods and tools and so on. And if we look at this, everyone today agrees that impact is important. Still only 28%, and the last 2 years it's been in the same range, don't really have an impact policy or impact strategy. But we try to dig deeper this year and learn a little bit about objectives. So most investors actually have objectives in the total portfolio or most of the portfolio activities. So I think that we are moving ahead on putting objectives into why and how we invest in this. This is maybe one area where I were a little bit surprised positively. I didn't think that it will come out so much. So that actually more and more of investors in early stage actually have metrics and measurements. They are very common, but still it seems like many also let the startups themselves define what kind of metrics and methods they are working with. And I think that relates back to those discussions we had earlier this morning, actually, that there are no universal components yet. There might be some things like the impact management project people have referred to as a learning platform to go ahead, but most design their own ways forward or let their startups do that. Another thing that I was also a little bit surprised about, that the EU taxonomy is actually pretty known, even if it's fairly new compared to other tools that have been around for quite some years. So we can see here over to the left that still the Global Impact Investing Network has been around for, as I said, now for 12 or 13 years, that their methods and the IRIS methodology, which are those different impact themes that we also work with in our look at startups, but that also the EU taxonomy has also been something that been fairly investigated. But there is also a need for collaboration. We can see throughout investors, they collaborate pretty much with different kind of organizations, more towards investors and business-related organizations than maybe towards NGOs and public organizations. And I hope we'll move further on there, because I think that looking into NGOs, Mary also told about her background and also emphasized on this, that there are a lot of organizations in the world that you can work strongly with on different topics that not necessarily work on a commercial basis, but still have a large understanding of those problems or that stakeholder ecosystem that is needed to get in place for solutions. And another thing that we also have seen is that still there is not so much emphasis on the social component. But through a lot of interviews we did in this report, and you can read them yourself, with also very commercial investors, more and more are actually talking about the need for the social component to also get in place with impact investments. It's not only, the necessity is not only to invest in something that could reduce CO2 or improve some kind of changes in supply chain regards to production or consumption and so on, but it also have to relate to where is this solution implemented in the world, and that are also those people or societies around that. So investors, also like last year, focus very much more on the environment. And we used IRIS metrics, you can see on the left. And we also put in the SDGs. I don't think SDGs matters so much, actually. I think this is more an agenda that we have some problems in the world. But the IRIS are more themes that investors look for. And we could see that energy and climate and agri-food is strong on that. Also health, as we've seen throughout the last couple of years. And there's also emphasizing on the commitment from investors. So you have to engage more as investors. And we looked here on what kind of engagement. Do you need more or less funding criteria, due diligence, time horizon, and so on? And you can see in most of those areas, impact investors engage more and spend more time working with those kind of solutions than compared to solutions in general. So that was a little bit of an appetizer due to climate and waste and so on. We have not printed a report for you, but you can obviously download it on our website. and find it there, and you're very, very happy, welcome to share it with whomever. So thanks for that.
Richard, thank you very much for this appetizer. But before I open up for questions, I'd just like to ask you if there was something which you found particularly interesting in this year's survey.
Yeah, as I pointed out, I was a little bit surprised compared to last 2 years, and also when I talk with investors, which I do a few times a week, not only in Denmark but very much over the screen around Nordic Baltics, but also in Europe, and at least due to the ones that participated, that they use already very many different kind of tools and methods, how to set up indicators and matrices and measure. I was a little surprised there, because still you can see it's very low on the strategy and the policies of what they do. But we could also see that fairly many of them have a focus also letting the startups tell them actually what are we supposed to measure here. And I think we also heard that in the accelerator discussion, that sometimes you also have to dig into that certain startup or that solution and let them guide you as an investor where we should look.
And when you talk to these investors, do they say something about some common tools, some sort of standard tools?
No, I think it's a little bit larger investors. If you look at larger VCs or capital funds throughout Europe that has focused on this space, the impact management project is something many refer to. But I think that, impact management project those are 4 steps on how you can actually find out how you define your impact. But I don't see it as a tool to measure. It's not. It's more how do you find the impact in your fund or in your investment focus or in a certain company. But it's not a tool actually to put up indicators or metrics. I think still many have to design that themselves. And I also, as Julia pointed out here, I think that we need to take some more steps towards the benchmarking somehow. So that, because there are many solutions reducing food waste or including people in the job market or cleaning up water or cleaning soil or so on. But I don't think that there are benchmarks on, if you do that, what is the cost of that on that solution? Or what is the time of that solution? Or how much money do you have to invest to have that happen? And I think we need to come there somehow to say that we are reducing, it's about kilos or acres or cubic meters or number of people or kilowatt hours or CO2 equivalents somehow, and then look on what is the time for this solution or the cost for this, operational cost for this solution. Because before that, how can we judge actually?
Richard, you also mentioned that the investors were very interested in the green area, like for instance energy, but still very few investors look for social outcomes. What are your reflections about that?
Well, I think 2 things. First, many early stage investors are people who have run technology companies before and exited them and now give back or invest themselves with their capital and competence, or have had high salaries in C-suite or consultancy like lawyers and so on. So they know about that. It's easier to then judge on how do you make money out of a proposition. And things like technology and very heavily technology-driven areas, for instance, like energy, are maybe then easier to understand than compared to social dimensions, which is more a task of welfare systems or society. So I think that is one. And the other thing is that it is also much more complex to measure social development, because it's about humans or a group of humans in a community or a society. And yeah, it is harder to measure effects of that because there are much more long-term effects, whereas technologies could be pretty short-term effects, like in 3 years or 5 years and so on. I think those are two things there why they don't invest so much into those areas.
But I sense a huge development in the social impact at the moment. So do you think this is changing?
It has to change, I think. But I think I'm not so sure if it's a development in social. We can look. Before we said impact startups, entrepreneurs, we said social entrepreneurs. And we had very much a leading force in the UK because they've invested very much in policy making and structures in society, how to invest in social entrepreneurs compared to even a place like the Nordics or other parts of Europe. Now I think that maybe where it happens is actually the ones, someone said here, maybe we don't talk about impact anymore in 5 or 10 years, which I don't think we will do in that sense, because I can already hear some accelerators or funds now, and Daria also mentioned that they're kind of, you could say, walking away a little bit from the word impact because it's so infused now with a lot of things, so it's more or less a worthless word somehow. But I think that the ones that move into social space are maybe the ones that are talking more about nature restoration and nature regeneration. Like, for instance, an accelerator in Holland called Fresh Ventures, or actually Venture Builder, that are looking very deep into that space. And the ones that work with that, or a company that comes tomorrow here, Slow Coffee out of Denmark, it's not about the coffee. It could be actually anything. It's about how they can restore and regenerate the ecosystem where coffee is produced, and for those people that are in that society. So I think that the ones that are looking into restoration generation now starts to drive this the social component.
Yeah, and I'll definitely encourage you to look at Slow. They're very interesting.
Yeah.
Richard is obviously a guy who knows what goes on in the Nordic region, so I'll open up for questions from you guys. Do you have questions for Richard about this year's report or anything else? Richard answers anything.
I'm totally transparent, so come ahead.
No? Well, in that case, I'd like to ask you, Richard, does it make sense, in your opinion, to talk about impact without measuring? Because there are a few investors here who don't demand some measuring.
I mean, I think it's a hard question. I can point back to Hampus Jakobsen, who I mentioned here in my first statement in this morning, working with Pale Blue Dots in Malmö. They really put a lot of emphasis in the due diligence on this. They have several scientific researchers employed in the fund. They do like 10 pages writing on the problem and solution in the due diligence. So they are very, very deep into this. Still, they not always start to measure in the first place, because they say that it is too hard if you really want to have different dimensions on how this solution works. You need to work with it over a time to see what is most important to measure.
So it's not a question about not measuring, but about finding the right time to measure.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, that's so. So I'm a little bit, on the other hand, since we are living in a society that love figures and measurements and so on, we are enforced with regulations also. So I think it's not either or, but maybe try to have a keep with the focus on the solution and find out what is more important to measure there. And that could also be to help your investees or the portfolio companies to dig a little bit deeper into the problem that they addressed in the first place on more root causes, because it's more important to measure some of the root causes to the first obvious problem. Say you like to reduce food waste, and maybe it's not about the food waste as such, but maybe it's more about what are the root causes to that food waste that is the underlying problem, and start to measure change there, maybe.
So, Richard, I am expecting a 4th annual report in December next year.
Yes.
Is there something in particular that you will keep your eyes on for the next year or so?
Yeah, I think I'll try to look more towards that, how investors benchmark the things they invest in. Because I think we need to move ahead on that. Because there is not only, there are very many good green ideas out there, and I think some of us are beyond that, but we need to dig deeper into what are the indicators they work with, and how does that change something, and can you benchmark that with other solutions or investors?
Richard, we have a question from the audience.
Related question to benchmarking and investors. Obviously, when it comes to VCs, they're not typically famous for the openness of their due diligence process, are they? And I was wondering how you see that transparency in the impact space, in the way, for example, these 10-page documents by the Blue Dot. Like, do they actually publish them? And do you see that there's, because of the importance of them actually, communicating on their impact approach, do you see that transparency actually filtrates throughout the due diligence process related to their impact measurement? Or do you still see that tiny little, outcome of the analysis is actually the one that is made public? Or do you see that this kind of the sharing mentality is more there now that we're talking of a sort of a common cause, which is impact in this case? Thank you.
Yeah, a good question and important question. I think it varies a little bit, but I think there are some very good examples on that is already happened. If you look at Norrsken, VC out of Stockholm, who SEB invested in, was closed at 125.6 million euros early this year. They actually came out with their first impact report this spring, where they actually put an open report on all, at that point, I think it was 27 companies they've invested in, and really put out all information about that. What are those indicators? How do they measure them? What have they reduced or increased in that way? They also put out their methodologies and workshop pieces. They are very transparent. They even put out everything about their fund, even the employee contracts and the carries and so on, and shareholders agreement. And another good example is Rubio Ventures, Impact Ventures in Netherlands. They should have been here, but due to Corona, they decided a few days not to come. But I think they also put a lot of things out there for understanding on how they do due diligence and what are the indicators and how do they work with their portfolio.
Still an exception.
It is, yes. But I think it's very important, and I don't see what should we hide, really.
But do you think that it will become more less an exception?
I think so, yes. I think so, yeah. Because I think more and more will understand that to give is to get something back. So you have to share openly how you work and what you work with, and under what conditions you invest or the portfolio gets investments.
Any more questions?
And because I also think that doing that then you get more reliable and for partnerships and also for startups to come to you.
More questions? No? Yes, one there.
Thank you very much for the work you're doing with the report, Richard. Really appreciate it. I have a question related to us in the Nordics. From your point of view, is there anything that we can or should be doing more of, or that we could offer that we're not offering right now? And I think this question stems from maybe the notion that we're not doing enough, or we don't have, kind of the common sense of urgency. So as you've looked across the landscape, is there something more that we can or should be doing?
I think we are very good on coming together and share learnings in the Nordics on those areas. It's in our nature, but I still think that we share very much about business opportunities in this space. It's very much also a little bit on what I related to early this morning, that I don't think sustainability is something that you should leverage from, but sustainability should leverage from you. So what can you do for sustainability? And I think that if we could come together more, not on the business opportunities, but maybe on how we perceive problems and solutions and work on them and share that. I think that is something I'd like to see. And that is a little bit hard sometimes, because then you have to pull down your trousers and see, this is how good we do it. We're not better than that for today. But I think that's the way forward. So more sauna together and talk about the problems and solutions. Maybe that's the way forward in the Nordics.
Okay, I think we'll have to go to the coffee break before Richard pulls down his pants. Richard, thank you very much for this report and for sharing it with us, and for your support to the entire impact ecosystem.
Thanks a lot for that. Yeah. So, thanks.